Welcome to Indie Film Forum. I'm your host, Kalpana Biswas. As a documentary filmmaker myself with a leaning towards stories of strong, transformational women, I've recently been intrigued by a largely forgotten fact, that women in Pittsburgh played a major role in the national women's movement in the early 70s and 80s. Something to be really proud of here. My guest today is Pat Ulbrich, who is visiting scholar at the University of Pittsburgh and director of In Sisterhood, an oral history and multimedia project focusing on influential feminist leaders and pioneering feminist organizations in Pittsburgh from the 60s to the 90s. Pat also co-founded the Women and Girls Foundation of Southwest Pennsylvania and has been on the board of Pittsburgh Action Against Rape. Welcome, Pat. Pat, you've been active in the national organization Sociologists for Women in Society and have even received an award in 2002. So talk about what surprised you the most when you started looking at the women's movement in Pittsburgh.
Well, that was quite an adventure. When I was developing this project, someone mentioned to me that there was a collection at the University of Pittsburgh Library, and I went over and was looking at this collection. I found this document that identified 48 feminist organizations in Pittsburgh. Now, I came to Pittsburgh in 1991, and there basically was no activity going on in terms of the women's movement. And yet, just 15 years earlier, there had been 48 feminist organizations here. That really intrigued me. And I really wanted to learn how that came about and then what happened. And so I developed the project, and I developed it as an oral history project so that I actually could interview those people who were still alive.
So what do you think made Pittsburgh's, the soil in Pittsburgh so rich for this, women's movement?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Well, I think there are a variety of, a variety of things going on. One, the employment context here for women was an anomaly. In 1960, that census showed that the labor force participation of women in Pittsburgh was well below the national average. And even into the late 1960s, as more women were graduating from college at higher and higher rates, there weren't jobs for them. And it was very difficult for them. And also, married women were not in the labor force. It was very peculiar. And so I think there was a lot of frustration on the part of women that women elsewhere in the country were increasingly going to college, but they were also increasingly in the labor force, and married women were increasingly in the labor force. And there just weren't opportunities here in Pittsburgh. And related to that, Wilma Scott Heide was one of those women who had experienced frustration here in terms of being employed at her level of expertise and knowledge. And when she learned about the National Organization for Women, she said she joined in 5 minutes. And then she was very proactive in becoming involved. So it took a context that was not favorable for women, especially in terms of employment, with people who had experienced frustration with that. And Wilma 7 months after she joined the organization, started a local chapter here. She had learned that she could do that, went to a national board meeting, and 2 months later was invited to be on the national board. And she recruited people in Pittsburgh, and people were hungry to learn about the women's movement and to begin to break down barriers, the barriers that they themselves had experienced.
So you've met several of the women who are still active. And,
well, let me say they're alive. The women's movement is in what we call abeyance. There aren't any red hot issues right now, but we've interviewed 52 people for the project. Unfortunately, some of the leaders, including Wilma Scott Heide, are deceased, but many of the people who knew them and who were active during that time. For instance, we've interviewed three of the people who were founding members of the National Organization for Women in 1967. They are still alive, and they're very enthusiastic about this project. They've been generous with their time in sharing stories and sharing photos, and other people have given me videos that were taken during that time. So I have access to good information.
One of the most fascinating things is these strong women were a part of this group that would come to PCTV, where we are sitting now, to talk about issues that were of interest and the issues that they were grappling with at that time. I thought that was fascinating, and you have a broadcast.
I do. In 1981, when PCTV started, a group of feminists created a video collective, and every month they would produce a feminist show here at PCTV. And I have copies of all of those shows, and we've created one short video that shows 3 of the women who participated. There was one show that brought together 10 women who were active in feminist organizations in Pittsburgh in 1982. And we had interviewed 3 of those women. So what we did was to take excerpts from that 1982 video and excerpts from the 2008 interviews, and to create this video that shows them in 1982 talking about their activism at the time that they were engaged in the work, and then in 2008 reflecting back on the work that they had done.
Oh, that's incredible. That's fascinating. So shall we take a look at the video?
I can remember going to a meeting dealing with personnel issues at the University of Pittsburgh and hearing somebody from the personnel department say something about, if you have a problem, come to so-and-so and talk about your problem. I got up and took a hold of a mic and said, that is one of the problems. Everybody goes on an individual basis with their individual problem that is probably just like 10 other people's problems, and they all get dealt with on an individual basis, and we need some more coming together and talking about the issues so we can move into some kind of collective action. And I said a few more things, and when I was finished and sat down, everybody started clapping and cheering.
You were I guess the hammer dropped, though, and I really became a feminist, an advocate, I should say, of the women's rights movement. Not because I wanted to. I got into the women's rights movement because I loved people that were in the women's rights movement. They had been friends of mine. They were sincere friends, such as Flo Black, who worked very, very closely with me with the Pittsburgh branch NAACP. There was Joanne Gardner and Ina Brady. And we were all very active together in the NAACP, and I saw no other thing to do than to support them with NOW.
One of the main things that happens with NOW, and it is not group therapy, it happens within the chapter, and it is an awareness that makes us understand how the personal is the political, how to make these personal things in our lives, such as not being able to get credit. Sometimes they're little groups just to commiserate, and then one learns that one better stop commiserating, stop agonizing, and start organizing, because the individual woman is isolated from other women within her stereotypical married situation.
The major change was when Betty Friedan said to me, and it must have been at the Mayflower Hotel. Why are you signing your name that way? Mrs. John A. Hill, have you had a sex change operation?
There had been no rape crisis center. Pittsburgh Action Against Rape didn't exist. There was the beginning of women's shelters. What is now the Women's Center and Shelter, I think, was the only thing going on at the time. There were two women who started out a shelter for abused women in a house in Mount Lebanon or Dormont.
We had a big demonstration going on against Sears and Roebuck, and the people from Now came to our meetings. They were involved in the picket lines. They gave their money. They bought NAACP memberships. And then they asked me if I would join Now. And I said, no. I said, I have one revolution going on now. I don't need another. I didn't realize how badly women could be discriminated against. And I thought that if you were white and you had not made it, that was tough. You had no one to blame but yourself. Not thinking about these many white women that were poor and were being discriminated against. Not only that, but I wasn't thinking about black women that were poor and being discriminated against. Because I was out there fighting for jobs, but I was fighting for jobs for black men. So sitting down on the floor of Joanne Evans Gardner's home, or sitting on the floor of Nancy Van Veeren's home and talking about things that happened to women, I got a different idea of discrimination, a greater idea of discrimination. So I became very active with Now. At the same time, I'm active with the NAACP. And I didn't have a choice. I had to be active with Now because, as I've told everybody, NAACP was the most sexist organization and Now was the most racist. Eventually at the Women's Center, we did a women's resource directory. We did kind of mini outward bound programs for women where we did rock climbing and whitewater rafting. And it was supposed to be, people stretching themselves and finding out, I can't do this, or yes, you can do this. A lot of effort going into trying to get the ERA passed, demonstration, a lot of things being written. It was, I guess it was a very heady time there for a while.
If you said the word abortion, it was very difficult to even get it printed. When we were involved, when NOW was involved in the abortion issue, some of us, and I'm guilty, kept saying, isn't there some other word you can use?
Ann Begler was an undergraduate student in the university at the time, and she was pretty active in, I guess they call it the ARC, the Abortion Rights Committee. That committee had meetings at the Women's Center. I remember getting calls from the university administration, who got calls from trustees who complained about us having these meetings. I got calls from the Catholic Church. Generally, I was pretty careful about how we did things, but I don't know, maybe I got a little careless at some point, or angry enough, or whatever it was. The university stopped funding us, but they still provided the budget. I moved into the provost's office, working on women's issues right in the provost's office, and still had access to that same budget. Ellie was one of my gophers. Go get this, Ellie, go get that, Ellie. So Joanne Evans Gardner and I were the noisy ones, and we'd get up. And then Ellie would take over and say the exact same things that we had said, but in her nice ladylike manner, and they listened to Ellie. So we played games on them.
It was later than that I said to Jack, I want my birth name back. And he said, that's another silly thing. I said, oh, and I finally got smart. Finally, one of my first smarts. I said, oh yes, dear, it is a little thing. And since it's so little, would you give up yours?
And you get people to work, and you work with those people, and you find out that you have so much more in common than you do have differences. So you're heading on that path that's going to get you to the same goal. We're all alike. We all cry tears. And it makes us all the same. We want the same thing. And the only way that we're going to get the same is to help each other. We have to help each other. We have to link arms.
It gives you chills to actually see what the women were like 25 years ago. As you started on your project in Sisterhood, what were the high points?
It started in 2008 as a project for the 250th anniversary of Pittsburgh. Gosh, you know, it's been such an honor to interview these people. Eleanor Smeal, who was the second woman in Pittsburgh to be elected as president of the National Organization for Women. And she was reelected twice, and she's now the CEO of the Feminist Majority Foundation in Washington, D.C. She is a national leader. She's known internationally for the incredible work that she does. But all of them, you know, I think whether they were college students engaging in the movement and learning about the possibilities for creating change and learning that they could affect something, to understanding about the Equal Rights Amendment and the role that Pittsburgh feminists played in the ratification for the Equal Rights Amendment, which was not ratified, but the activity around that for 10 years in the United States. People from Pittsburgh played a major, major role in that.
You mentioned Wilma. Could you talk about her a little and her contribution?
She involved everyone in Pittsburgh. She recruited people to serve on the board or recruited them to chair a national task force, encouraged them to be involved in national events. And for instance, Eleanor Smeal was on the board of NOW when Wilma was the president. And then that got her, set her on that path. And they knew what the national issues were. They brought them back to Pittsburgh, surveyed the context here, and developed strategies for addressing those issues in ways that were appropriate to Pittsburgh.
I've seen a short film that you made called Sisters in Force, where you talk about the whole struggle that a lot of women had, in this particular case, in trying to break barriers in getting into the police force.
We actually have two videos. One is in Sisterhood, the women's movement in Pittsburgh, and the second is called Bridge Builders, and that is just about Black women who were involved in the women's movement. And this is one piece of that particular exhibit. It opened at the August Wilson Center in 2012, and then it was also shown, installed at the University Museum at IUP in Indiana.
My grandmother seemed like she worked all the time. She did days' work.
My mother worked as a housekeeper. The house we live in and the house that they bought, they paid for it by scrubbing floors.
Up Center Avenue they come, blacks and whites marching together, young and old.
I had become involved with the NAACP in the protest marches, and every day we were down there demonstrating for jobs.
It was in Alma's blood to know how to move a movement, how to get things done.
We do have the opportunity to compete the same as other people, but in order to have a representative workforce, you must have affirmative action. You must go out there and seek those people.
She's been the voice for so many Black females in Pittsburgh, and not necessarily always out front. Some of the stuff has been behind the scenes, to where she kind of took up for us when we didn't even know she was taking up for us.
Pittsburgh Police Department did not have any women as real police officers.
We would get up and talk about the necessity of women, their value, and that women should be equal with men.
There were women that were considered police officers, but they weren't. So the NAACP now and the Pittsburgh Guardians, you know, the NAACP, you know now, and the Pittsburgh Guardians was a group of Black police officers who had formed an organization. And we sued the city of Pittsburgh because they did not have women on the police force. We won. And the city of Pittsburgh was given a consent decree to hire women. And to make things equal, they were to hire in groups of 4. 1 black woman, 1 white woman, 1 white man, and 1 black man.
It was a class action brought on behalf of Black applicants for police officer position, female applicants for police officer position who were not being granted equal consideration.
The basis of our lawsuits always was that something had to be done to remedy past discrimination. That in fact, we'd have to show that either discrimination had occurred in the past or that the testing measures that were being used were in fact improperly disqualifying people.
It was exciting and it was awesome. That partnership and between the NAACP now and the Guardians Grid of Pittsburgh was something like an earthquake.
They were hiring women on the Pittsburgh Police Force for the very first time. And the salary, $13,000, you know, eye care, dental care, you know, all the benefits.
And I knew inside that I could do that.
And then they called to come in and take a test. And we did at the Civic Arena. There were actually approximately 4,000 people to take the test, and they were hiring 24.
I was excited, but then I was scared too. I'd never been around any guns, and you know, I was scared of guns, and you know, I didn't think I'd be able to make it. And I remember her telling me that if I didn't take that opportunity, I'd be there cleaning offices for the rest of my life, just like her.
Being in that first class, I think we all kind of stuck together. It was strange, but we really did. Black and white, men and women, we kind of helped one another.
My best day at the academy was the day that I passed the firearms. That was my best day. My worst day at the academy would have been the day that the N-word was used. I didn't think anybody was harboring any ill feelings towards anyone.
Before we even started in the academy, wives of police officers, I mean, they would be picketing downtown because they didn't want their husbands working with women. So it was like 2 things going on. It was like women coming on the police department, for one, and then blacks coming on the police department. So it's like you had like a double whammy.
No one in Pittsburgh had seen women walking beats, you know, with a gun and a badge and a nightstick.
One of my first roll calls, I stood in line and the sergeant gave out the assignments and I was still standing there. And I asked him, where should I go? He said, go to the closet and get a broom. I didn't know any better. And I turned and said, where's the closet? I needed a job and wanted that job. And one of the older white males, Harry Fisher, I'll never forget him, he grabbed me by the shoulder. He said, don't do that, kid. He said, come with me.
You would work with an officer, he didn't speak to you the whole day. And you're riding with this officer all day long, never said one word, never opened his mouth, never asked you how you doing, how you feel, nothing. But you just had to do what you had to do, and that's what we did.
And I remember one lady telling me to go around the back. Ma'am, I'm not going around the back. You call the police? I want the real police, you know?
Most of the community, they seemed like they were behind us, the majority. But as I said, there were guys that would walk up and just tell us, I'll never let a woman arrest me.
You know, we just got in. It's not like we're accepted. And they were ostracizing us. Yes, we got a job, but we got to stay on this job. There has to be some retention, promotion.
I just made up my mind. I don't care what y'all say. I don't care what y'all do. Y'all ain't making me get off of this job, you know, because it was the best job that I ever had.
We knew that we were in for the duration, and we were going to dig our heels in and do what it was that we needed to do. We had mortgages to pay, bills to pay, mouths to feed, just like everyone else.
Our involvement with the women was much greater after they became police officers. We wanted really to do all we could for the Black women and other women who had gotten the jobs.
We needed her at that time, and she was there. You know, she really took care of us. She helped us when we had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to.
And she let us know that a lot of people worked hard to get us on the job. She would say, now you make us proud.
Because of us having that insight early on and being able to ask for help, sustained us. We were the women who were able to stay on the job, and we didn't fall by the wayside.
The African-American woman on this job has always had to be 3 times better than any of the officers out there.
Being a police officer is like a calling. And that may sound kind of corny, but I think it's just something that everybody can't do. You have to love what you do to be any good at it. When I first came on, I came on because of the pay and the benefits, but I didn't stay on because of the pay and the benefits.
Chief Coleman, how may I help you?
4224 County.
Okay, now which one is the house that got shot? That one and the one back?
Back. Mm-hmm.
She says, I talked with 10 people. She says, and 10 people, when I asked them, who do you think could run the Wilkinsburg Police Department? 8 out of the 10 people said, Cokie Coleman is your girl. With me having that background as a community activist, I knew that I could shape this place. I could handle this. And that was just a great time. It was an exciting time because you saw Black and white together. You saw people that had the good sense to know that if I help my neighbor, that it's only going to make everything okay.
We all cry tears, and it makes us all the same. We want the same thing, and the only way that we're going to get the same is to help each other. We have to help each other. We have to link arms.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you for watching Indie Film Forum. I'm Kalpana Biswas. See you next time. For more information, please go to our websites.